Unitarianism is a theological movement, named for its understanding of God as one person, in direct contrast to Trinitarianism, which defines God as three persons coexisting consubstantially as one being. Unitarians maintain that Jesus is in some sense the Son of God, but is not the one God. Unitarianism is also known for the rejection of several other conventional Christian doctrines, including the soteriological doctrines of original sin and predestination, and, in more recent history, biblical inerrancy. In J. Gordon Melton's Encyclopedia of American Religions it is classified among the liberal family of churches. The Unitarian movement, although not called Unitarian initially, began almost simultaneously in Poland-Lithuania and Transylvania in the mid-16th century. Among the adherents were a significant number of Italians. In England the first Unitarian Church was established in 1774 on Essex Street, London, where today's British Unitarian headquarters is still located. The first official acceptance of the Unitarian faith on the part of the congregation in America was by King's Chapel in Boston, from where James Freeman began teaching Unitarian doctrine in 1784, and was appointed rector and revised the prayer book according to Unitarian doctrines in 1786. Terminology: Unitarianism is a proper noun and follows the same English usage as other theologies that have developed within a religious movement. The term existed shortly before it became the name of a religious movement, and thus occasionally it is used as a common noun that would describe any understanding of Jesus Christ that denies the Trinity or which believes that God is only one person. In that case it would be a non-Trinitarian belief system not necessarily associated with the Unitarian religious movement. For example, the Unitarian movement has never accepted the godhood of Jesus, and therefore does not include those non-Trinitarian belief systems that do such as Oneness Pentecostalism, United Pentecostal Church International and the True Jesus Church and the writings of Michael Servetus and which maintain that Jesus is God as a single person. Although these groups are Unitarians in the common sense, they are not in the proper sense. To avoid confusion, this article is about Unitarianism as a religious movement. For the generic form of Unitarianism, see non-Trinitarianism. Recently some religious groups have adopted the 19th-century term Biblical Unitarianism to distinguish their theology from Unitarianism. These likewise have no direct relation to the Unitarian movement. The term Unitarian is sometimes applied today to those who belong to a Unitarian church but who do not hold a Unitarian theological belief. In the past, the vast majority of members of Unitarian churches were Unitarians also in theology. Over time, however, some Unitarians and Unitarian Universalists moved away from the traditional Christian roots of Unitarianism. For example, in the 1890s the American Unitarian Association began to allow non-Christian and non-theistic churches and individuals to be part of their fellowship. As a result, people who held no Unitarian belief began to be called Unitarians, because they were members of churches that belonged to the American Unitarian Association. After several decades, the non-theistic members outnumbered the theological Unitarians. A similar, though proportionally much smaller, phenomenon has taken place in the Unitarian churches in the United Kingdom, Canada, and other countries, which remain more theistically based. Unitarian theology, therefore, is distinguishable from the belief system of modern Unitarian and Unitarian Universalist churches and fellowships. This article includes information about Unitarianism as a theology and about the development of theologically Unitarian churches. For a more specific discussion of Unitarianism as it evolved into a pluralistic liberal religious movement, see Unitarian Universalism. History. Unitarianism, both as a theology and as a denominational family of churches, was defined and developed in 5 countries: Poland, Transylvania, England, Wales and America. Although there were common beliefs among Unitarians in each of these regions, they initially grew independently from each other. Only later did they influence one another and accumulate more similarities. The Ecclesia Minor or Minor Reformed Church of Poland, better known today as the Polish Brethren, was born as the result of a controversy that started on January 22, 1556, when Piotr of Gonia DZ, a Polish student, spoke out against the doctrine of the Trinity during the General Synod of the Reformed Churches of Poland held in the village of Sosiemin. After 9 years of debate, in 1565, the anti-Trinitarians were excluded from the existing synod of the Polish Reformed Church and they began to hold their own synods as the Ecclesia Minor. Though frequently called Arians by those on the outside, the views of Fausto Sosny became the standard in the Church, and these doctrines were quite removed from Arianism. So important was Sosny to the formulation of their beliefs that those outside Poland usually referred to them as Socinians. The Polish Brethren were disbanded in 1658 by the Sejm. They were ordered to convert to Roman Catholicism or leave Poland. Most of them went to Transylvania or Holland, where they embraced the name Unitarian. Sosny's grandson Andrzej Sauty Sr. in 1665 Euro 1668 published Bibliotheca Fratrum Polinorum quos Unitarios vocant. The Unitarian Church in Transylvania was first recognized by the Edict of Torda, issued by the Transylvanian Diet under Prince John II Sigismund Zápolya, and was first led by Ferenc David. The term Unitarian first appeared as Unitaria Religio in a document of the Diet of La Copyright CFALVA, Transylvania, on October 25, 1600, though it was not widely used in Transylvania until 1638, when the formal Recepta Unitaria Religio was published. The word Unitarian had been circulating in private letters in England, in reference to imported copies of such publications as the Library of the Polish Brethren who are called Unitarians. Henry Hedworth was the first to use the word Unitarian in print in English, and the word first appears in a title in Stephen Nye's A Brief History of the Unitarians, called also Socinians. The movement gained popularity in England in the wake of the Enlightenment and began to become a formal denomination in 1774 when Theophilus Lindsay organised meetings with Joseph Priestley, founding the first avowedly Unitarian congregation in the country, at Essex Street Church in London. The first official acceptance of the Unitarian faith on the part of the congregation in America was by King's Chapel in Boston, which settled James Freeman in 1782, and revised the prayer book into a mild Unitarian liturgy in 1785. In 1800, Joseph Stevens Buckminster became minister of the Brattle Street Church in Boston, where his brilliant sermons, literary activities, and academic attention to the German New Criticism helped shape the subsequent growth of Unitarianism in New England. Unitarian Henry Ware was appointed as the Hollis Professor of Divinity at Harvard College, in 1805. Harvard Divinity School then shifted from its conservative roots to teach Unitarian theology. C. Harvard and Unitarianism. Buckminster's close associate William Ellery Channing was settled over the Federal Street Church in Boston, 1803, and in a few years he became the leader of the Unitarian movement. A theological battle with the Congregational churches resulted in the formation of the American Unitarian Association at Boston in 1825. Beliefs, Christology. Unitarians believe that mainline Christianity does not adhere to strict monotheism but that they do by maintaining that Jesus was a great man and a prophet of God, perhaps even a supernatural being, but not God himself. They believe Jesus did not claim to be God, and that his teachings did not suggest the existence of a triune God. Unitarians believe in the moral authority but not necessarily the divinity of Jesus. Their theology is thus opposed to the Trinitarian theology of other Christian denominations. Unitarian Christology can be divided according to whether Jesus is believed to have had a pre-human existence. Both forms maintain that God is one being and one person, and that Jesus is the Son of God, but generally not God himself. Socinian Christology. The Christology commonly called Socinian, refers to the belief that Jesus Christ began his life when he was born as a human. In other words, the teaching that Jesus pre-existed his human body is rejected. There are various views ranging from the belief that Jesus was simply a human who, because of his greatness, was adopted by God as his son to the belief that Jesus literally became the Son of God when he was conceived by the Holy Spirit. This Christology existed in some form or another prior to Sosny. Theodocus of Byzantium, Artemin and Paul of Samosata denied the pre-existence of Christ. These ideas were continued by Marcellus of Ancyra and his pupil Photinus in the 4th century AD. In the Radical Reformation and Anabaptist movements of the 16th century, this idea resurfaced with Susney's uncle, Lelio Susney. Having influenced the Polish Brethren to a formal declaration of this belief in the Rakovian Catechism, Fausto Susney involuntarily ended up giving his name to this Christological position, which continued with English Unitarians such as John Biddle, Thomas Belsham, Theophilus Lindsay, Joseph Priestley, and James Martineau. In America, most of the early Unitarians were Arian in Christology, but among those who held to a Socinian view was James Freeman. Regarding the virgin birth of Jesus, among those who denied the pre-existence of Christ, some held to it and others did not. Its denial is sometimes ascribed to the Ebionites. However, Origen and Eusebius both indicate that some Ebionites did accept the virgin birth. On the other hand, Theodocus of Byzantium, Artemon, and Paul of Samosata all accepted the virgin birth. In the early days of Unitarianism, the stories of the virgin birth were accepted by most. The Chambers Biographical Dictionary incorrectly ascribes denial of the virgin birth to Ferenc David, leader of the Transylvanian Unitarians. However, there were a number of Unitarians who questioned the historical accuracy of the Bible, and this made them question the virgin birth story. Beginning in England and America in the 1830s, and manifesting itself primarily in Transcendentalist Unitarianism, which emerged from the German liberal theology associated primarily with Friedrich Schleiermacher, the philanthropist view increased in popularity. Its proponents took an intellectual and humanistic approach to religion. They embraced evolutionary concepts, asserted the inherent goodness of man, and abandoned the doctrine of biblical infallibility, rejecting most of the miraculous events in the Bible. Notable examples are James Martineau, Theodore Parker, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Frederick Henry Hedge. Famous American Unitarian William Ellery Channing was a believer in the virgin birth until later in his life, after he had begun his association with the Transcendentalists. Arian Christology, the Christology commonly called Arian, holds that Jesus, before his human life, existed as the Logos, a being created by God, who dwelt with God in heaven. There are many varieties of this form of Unitarianism, ranging from the belief that the Son was a divine spirit of the same nature as God before coming to earth, to the belief that he was an angel or other lesser spirit creature of a wholly different nature from God. Not all of these views necessarily were held by Arius, the namesake of this Christology. It is still non-Trinitarian because, according to this belief system, Jesus has always been beneath God, though higher than humans. Arian Christology was not a majority view among Unitarians in Poland, Transylvania or England. It was only with the advent of American Unitarianism that it gained a foothold in the Unitarian movement. Among early Christian theologians who believed in a pre-existent Jesus who was subordinate to God the Father were Lucian of Antioch, Eusebius of Caesarea, Arius, Eusebius of Nicomedia, Asterius the Sophist, Eunomius, and Ulfilas, as well as Felix, Bishop of Urgell. Proponents of this Christology also associate it with Justin Martyr and Hippolytus of Rome. Anti-Trinitarian Michael Servetus did not deny the pre-existence of Christ, so he may have believed in it was the reflection of Christ, and that reflection of Christ was the Word with God that consisted of God himself, shining brightly in heaven, and it was God himself, and that the Word was the very essence of God or the manifestation of God's essence, and there was in God no other substance or hypostasis than his Word, in a bright cloud where God then seemed to subsist. And in that very spot the face and personality of Christ shone bright. Isaac Newton had Arian beliefs as well. Famous 19th-century Arian Unitarians include Andrews Norton and Dr. William Ellery Channing. Other beliefs, though there is no specific authority on convictions of Unitarian belief aside from rejection of the Trinity, the following beliefs are generally accepted: one God and the oneness or unity of God. The life and teachings of Jesus Christ constitute the exemplar model for living one's own life. Reason, rational thought, science, and philosophy coexist with faith in God. Humans have the ability to exercise free will in a responsible, constructive and ethical manner with the assistance of religion. Human nature in its present condition is neither inherently corrupt nor depraved, but capable of both good and evil, as God intended. No religion can claim an absolute monopoly on the Holy Spirit or theological truth. Though the authors of the Bible were inspired by God, they were humans and therefore subject to human error. Traditional doctrines that malign God's character or veil the true nature and mission of Jesus Christ, such as the doctrines of predestination, eternal damnation, and the vicarious sacrifice or satisfaction theory of the atonement, are rejected. Unitarians have liberal views of God, Jesus, the world and purpose of life as revealed through reason, scholarship, science, philosophy, scripture and other prophets and religions. They believe that reason and belief are complementary and that religion and science can coexist and guide them in their understanding of nature and God. They also do not enforce belief in creeds or dogmatic formulas. Although there is flexibility in the nuances of belief or basic truths for the individual Unitarian Christian, general principles of faith have been recognized as a way to bind the group in some commonality. Adherents generally accept religious pluralism and find value in all teachings, but remain committed to their core belief in Christ's teachings. Unitarians generally value a secular society in which government is kept separate from religious affairs. Most contemporary Unitarian Christians believe that one's personal moral convictions guide one's political activities, and that a secular society is the most viable, just and fair. Unitarian Christians reject the doctrine of some Christian denominations that God chooses to redeem or save only those certain individuals that accept the creeds of, or affiliate with, a specific church or religion, from a common ruin or corruption of the mass of humanity. In 1938, the Christian leader attributed the religion of Jesus, not a religion about Jesus, to Unitarians, though the phrase was used earlier by Congregationalist Rollin Lindhart in 1924 and earlier still by U.S. President Thomas Jefferson. Worship within the Unitarian tradition accommodates a wide range of understandings of God, while the focus of the service may be simply the celebration of life itself. Each Unitarian congregation is at liberty to devise its own form of worship, though commonly, Unitarians will light their chalice, have a story for all ages, and include sermons, prayers, hymns and songs. Some will allow attendees to publicly share their recent joys or concerns. Modern Christian Unitarian organizations. This section relates to Unitarian churches and organizations today which are still specifically Christian within or outside Unitarian Universalism, which embraces non-Christian religions. Hungarian and Transylvanian Unitarian churches. The largest Unitarian denomination worldwide today is also the oldest surviving Unitarian denomination. The Unitarian Church of Transylvania. The church in Romania and Hungary still looks to the statement of faith, the Summa Universi Theologiae Christiani Secundum Unitarios, though today assent to this is not required. The modern Unitarian Church in Hungary and the Transylvanian Unitarian Church are affiliated with the International Council of Unitarians and Universalists and claim continuity with the historical Unitarian Christian tradition established by Ferenc David in 1565 in Transylvania under John II Sigismund Zápolya. The Unitarian churches in Hungary and Transylvania were structured and organized along a church hierarchy that includes the election by the synod of a national bishop who serves as superintendent of the church. Many Hungarian Unitarians embraced the principles of rationalist Unitarianism. Unitarian high schools exist only in Transylvania, including the John Sigismund Unitarian Academy in Cluj-Napoca, and the Bird Markubitz's Unitarius Gymnasium in Krastarusakiesk. Both teach rationalist Unitarianism. UCC USA, the Unitarian Christian Conference USA is a network of congregations and ministers in the United States identifying with the historic Unitarian Christian tradition. The Unitarian Christian Conference USA promotes the concept of the unity of God and the message and example of Jesus of Nazareth as a rational and enriching spiritual path for personal development and a guide for creating a world of justice, peace and human dignity. UUCF, the Unitarian Universalist Christian Fellowship, predates the consolidation of the American Unitarian Association and Universalist Church of America into the Unitarian Universalist Association in 1961. UUCF continues as a subgroup of UUA serving the Christian members. ICUU, Other Unitarian Christian groups are affiliated with the International Council of Unitarians and Universalists, founded in 1995. The ICUU tends to contain a majority membership who express specifically Unitarian Christian beliefs, rather than the religious pluralism of the UUA, but nevertheless remain liberal, open-minded and inclusive communities. The ICUU has full member groups in the United States, Australia, New Zealand, United Kingdom, Canada, Brazil, Czech Republic, Finland, Germany, Hungary, Indonesia, India, Nigeria, Pakistan, Philippines, Romania, South Africa, and Sri Lanka. The ICUU includes small associate groups, including Congregazione Italiana Cristiano Unitariana, Turin and the Bar Copyright David Unitarian Association, Oslo. AUC, the American Unitarian Conference, was formed in 2000 and stands between UUA and ICUU in attachment to the Christian element of modern Unitarianism. The American Unitarian Conference is open to non-Christian Unitarians, being particularly popular with non-Christian theists and deists. The AUC has 4 congregations in the United States. UCMI, Unitarian Christian Ministries International, was a Unitarian ministry incorporated in South Carolina, USA until its dissolution in 2013 when it merged with the UCEC. It was a faith body that revitalized classical Unitarian Christian praxis on a global scale. Partnerships had been formed in Africa, India, Australia, and Europe. UCMI adherents were directed to the Unitarian Christian Emerging Church, which became their spiritual community of faith. UCEC has carried on the ministries of UCMI, and is active in promoting Unitarian Christianity around the globe. UCA, the Unitarian Christian Association, was founded 1991 by Reverend Lancelot Garrard and others to promote specifically Christian ideas within the General Assembly of Unitarian and Free Christian Churches. Just as the UUCF and ICUU maintain formal links with UUA in America, so the UCA does with the GAUFCC in the UK. The majority of Unitarian Christian publications are sponsored by an organization and published specifically for their membership. They generally do not serve as a tool for missionary work or encouraging conversions. Australia, the Sydney Unitarian Church was founded 1850 under a Reverend Stanley and was a vigorous denomination during the 19th century. The modern church has properties in Adelaide, Sydney and Melbourne, and smaller congregations elsewhere in Australia and New Zealand. South Africa, the Unitarian movement in South Africa was founded in 1867 by the Reverend De Witt Farr, member of a well-known Cape family. He encountered advanced liberal religious thought while completing his studies at the University of Leiden in Holland for the ministry of the Dutch Reformed Church in Cape Town. On his return to South Africa he preached a probationary sermon in the Groot Kerk, Cape Town. This led to a public appeal to him to found a community based upon what was called the New Theology. The New Theology as preached by De Witt Farr was grounded in what he described as the very essence of religion, love of God and love of neighbor. Responding to popular appeal, De Witt Farr gathered a congregation of people who felt the need for a church unfettered by traditional dogmas, open to the advances of modern knowledge and receptive to new spiritual insights. From 1867 to 1890 the fledgling church, known as the Free Protestant Church, rented premises in a commercial building in Cape Town, and in 1890 a warehouse in the city was purchased and converted into the present church. Reverend Farr continued as minister until 1897 when he was succeeded by Reverend Ramsden Bamforth, from England. He conducted a thriving ministry to 1937 and brought the Free Protestant Church into the international Unitarian movement in 1921. Ministers who followed Bamforth were William and Wilma Constable, Donald Livingston, Magnus Ratter, Victor Carpenter, Eugene Widrick, Leon Fay, Robert Steen. The Cape Town Church is not exclusively Christian since formal members and friends in the congregation maintain their own personal beliefs. There is no specific dogma or creed that members must follow. They consider Unitarianism as a way of life with spiritual dimensions. The church is in the central city but has congregations in the suburbs as well. The website for the Unitarian community of Cape Town is at 1. There are also independent fellowships in Durban and Johannesburg. The national website is at 2. Biblical Unitarian Movement. In the mainstream of the Protestant Reformation there is the Biblical Unitarian movement. Today, Biblical Unitarianism identifies the Christian belief that the Bible teaches God is a singular persona the Father and that Jesus is a distinct being, his Son. A few denominations use this term to describe themselves, clarifying the distinction between them and those churches which, from the late 19th century, evolved into modern British Unitarianism and, primarily in the United States, Unitarian Universalism. In Italy the Biblical Unitarian movement powered by the ideas of Susny and others is represented today by the churches associated with the Christian Church in Italy. This movement in Italy claims a strong Christian and biblical soul. From the analysis of documents that you can find on the official site of the CCI, it is clear that the doctrinal position of this Christian confession of faith is therefore akin to the so-called Biblical Unitarian movement and on the other hand, far from that of Unitarian Universalist Association who, although sharing a 16th-century origin, have been influenced by many non-biblical ideas. The Christian Church in Italy has significant similarities with the Biblical Unitarian movement, although it maintains a cautious position on some doctrinal points. Wilbur wrote about the Unitarian movement, the religious movement whose history we are endeavoring to trace. Became fully developed in thought and polity in only 4 countries, one after another, namely Poland, Transylvania, England and America. But in each of these it showed, along with certain individual characteristics, a general spirit, a common point of view, and a doctrinal pattern that tempt one to regard them as all outgrowths of a single movement which passed from one to another. For nothing could be more natural than to presume that these common features implied a common ancestry. Yet such is not the fact, for in each of these 4 lands the movement, instead of having originated elsewhere, and been translated only after attaining mature growth, appears to have sprung independently and directly from its own native roots, and to have been influenced by other and similar movements only after it had already developed an independent life and character of its own. The Christian Church in Italy believes that God is only one person in direct contrast with the doctrine of the Trinity which defines God as 3 coexisting persons in one substance, merged into one being. So CCI adheres to strict monotheism by believing that Jesus was a perfect and holy man, virginally begotten in Mary, the promised Christ, the Son of God, and is now at the right hand of God praying for the whole Church. The Christian Church in Italy rejects certain traditional Christian doctrines including the soteriological doctrines of original sin and predestination. The CCI is distinct from other religious movements which exalt Jesus as the only true God, as for example the Oneness Pentecostalism, the United Pentecostal Church International, and the True Jesus Church. Ecclesiology. When Unitarianism developed in the 17th century during the Protestant era of the evolution of Christianity, the strongholds in Transylvania, Poland, and eventually Britain and the northeastern parts of the United States were firmly in the congregational tradition. In the Hungarian-speaking territories it adopted a governance system that combined the synodal and episcopal models. For those churches under the congregational model, each church governed itself independently of a hierarchical authority. These small congregations belonged, however, to more formal associations of churches. The American Unitarian Association, formed in 1825, was one of these. Later, in 1961, the American Unitarian Association and the Universalist Church of America merged to form the Unitarian Universalist Association, which is the largest organization of Unitarians in the U.S. The UUA is no longer an explicitly Christian organization and does not focus exclusively on the core teachings of Jesus Christ or Christianity. Several Unitarian organizations still promote Christianity as their central theme. Among them, Unitarian Ministries International, the Unitarian Universalist Christian Fellowship, the General Assembly of Unitarian and Free Christian Churches of the United Kingdom, and the Unitarian Christian Association. In the U.S., the newest organization promoting a return to the theistic roots of Unitarianism is the American Unitarian Conference, formed in 2000. The AUC's stated goal is to formulate and promote classical Unitarian-based, unifying religious convictions, which balance the needs of members with a practical approach to inclusion and progressive free thought. Interfaith dialogue and relations. Catholic, Orthodox and Protestant creeds generally insist on Trinitarian belief as an essential aspect of Christianity and basic to a group's continuity of identity with the historical Christian faith. As a result, Unitarians have often been excluded from fellowship with churches that accept the creeds of the Nicene and pre-Chalcedonian churches. However, occasionally, especially in Protestant history, traditionally Trinitarian groups have accepted Unitarians. Friendliness toward Unitarianism has sometimes gone hand in hand with anti-Catholicism. In some cases non-Trinitarian belief has been adopted by some, and tolerated in Christian churches as a non-essential. This was the case in the English Presbyterian Church, and in the Congregational Church in New England late in the 18th century. The Restoration movement also attempted to forge a compatible relation between Trinitarians and non-Trinitarians, as did the Seventh-day Baptists and various Adventists. The non-Trinitarian tendency in this latter group emerged from their original theology and their rejection of Catholic traditions regarding the Trinity. In some cases, this openness to Unitarianism within traditionally Trinitarian churches has been inspired by a very broad ecumenical motive. Modern liberal Protestant denominations are often accused by Trinitarians within their ranks, and critics outside, of being indifferent to the doctrine, and therefore self-isolated from their respective Trinitarian pasts and heritage. In some cases, it is charged that these Trinitarian denominations are no longer Christian, because of their toleration of Unitarian belief among their teachers and in their seminaries. At a local level, many Unitarian Christian groups have links with congregations affiliated with the United Church of Christ, Disciples of Christ, and Unity Church. Some argue they feel more at home within these denominations than Unitarian Universalism. A small proportion of Unitarian Christians also have links with progressive Christianity. Despite the close friendship and shared heritage that exist between adherents of Unitarian Universalism and those of Unitarian Christianity, there is an element within Unitarian Universalism that specifically opposes Unitarian Christian groups, believing them to be exclusive and intolerant of non-Christian thought. Likewise, some Unitarian Christians also believe that Unitarian Universalists are intolerant of Christian thought and tend to marginalize Christians. Notable Unitarians. Notable Unitarians include bar copyright La Barter Cubed K, the 20th-century composer, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Theodore Parker in theology and ministry, Charles Darwin, Isaac Newton, Joseph Priestley, John Archibald Wheeler, and Linus Pauling in science, George Boole in mathematics, Susan B. Anthony and John Locke in civil government, Florence Nightingale in humanitarianism and social justice, John Bowring, and Samuel Taylor Coleridge in literature, Frank Lloyd Wright in the arts, Josiah Wedgwood in industry, Thomas Starr King in ministry and politics, and Charles William Eliot in education. Although raised a Quaker, Ezra Cornell, founder of Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, attended the Unitarian Church and was one of the founders of Ithaca's first Unitarian Church. Erasmus Darwin Shattuck, a signatory to the Oregon State Constitution, founded the first Unitarian Church in Oregon in 1865. 11 Nobel Prizes have been awarded to Unitarians, Robert Millikan and John Bardeen in physics. Emily Green Balk, Albert Schweitzer, Linus Pauling, and Jeff Livermore for peace. George Wald and David H. Hubel in medicine. Linus Pauling in chemistry. And Herbert A. Simon in economics. 5 presidents of the United States were Unitarians: John Adams, John Quincy Adams, Millard Fillmore, Thomas Jefferson, and William Howard Taft. Adlai Stevenson II, the Democratic presidential nominee in 1952 and 1956, was a Unitarian, and he was the last Unitarian to be nominated by a major party for president. British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain was raised by his Unitarian statesman father, Joseph Chamberlain. Certainly, in the United Kingdom, Unitarianism the religion of only a small minority of the country's population had an enormous impact on Victorian politics, not only in the larger cities Birmingham, Leeds, Manchester, and Liverpool but in smaller communities like Leicester where there were so many Unitarian mayors that the Unitarian chapel was known as the Mayor's Nest. In Birmingham, a most impressive Unitarian church was opened in 1862. The Church of the Messiah, as it was called, was more than the center of a small sect, it was a cultural and intellectual center of a whole society, a place where ideas about society were openly and critically discussed. Henry W. Kroski unregistered trademark Birmingham Unitarian congregation included Joseph Chamberlain, as well as Arthur, his younger brother, who was married to Louisa Kenrick. William Kenrick, his brother-in-law, who was married to Mary Chamberlain. And Robert F. Martineau, who was the nephew of Harriet Martineau, another outspoken public figure and author of the time. Robert F. Martineau was related to the Chamberlain family by marriage. These elite British Unitarian families, the Nettlefolds, the Martineaus, the Luptons, the Kitsons and the Kenricks, found a most significant place in the social and political history of Victorian through to mid-20th century Britain. Other Unitarians include Sir Tim Berners-Lee, Lancelot Ware, founder of Mensa, Sir Adrian Boult, the conductor, Ray Kurzweil, notable inventor and futurist, and C. Killick Millard, founder of the Dignity in Dying Society to support voluntary euthanasia. Ram Mohan Roy, an Indian reformer of the 18th century, was a Unitarian who published a book called Precepts of Jesus. See also Arianism, Unitarian, Unitarian Church. Anarminianism Radical Arians of the 4th century. Binitarianism, Christadelphians, Divine Simplicity, Jesus in Islam, Messianic Judaism, Monarchianism, Non-Trinitarianism, Non-Trinitarian Churches, Oneness Pentecostalism, Polish Brethren, Zabelianism, Non-Subscribing Presbyterian Church of Ireland, a denomination that maintains close links with Unitarianism whilst maintaining its own identity. References. Sources: Tuggy, Dale, Unitarianism, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Wilbur, Earl Morse, Our Unitarian Heritage, Berkeley, California, Starr King School for the Minister. Joseph Henry Allen, Our Liberal Movement in Theology, Joseph Henry Allen, sequel to Our Liberal Movement, Anthony F. Buzzard and Charles F. Hunting, The Doctrine of the Trinity, Christianity's Self-Inflicted Wound, ISBN 1-57309-309-2. John White Chadwick, Old and New Unitarian Belief. George Willis Cook, Unitarianism in America, A History of its Origin and Development. Patrick Navas, Divine Truth or Human Tradition, A Reconsideration of the Roman Catholic Protestant Doctrine of the Trinity in Light of the Hebrew and Christian Scriptures. ISBN 1-4259-4832-4. Earl Morse Wilbur, A History of Unitarianism, Socinianism and Its Antecedents, Harvard University Press, 1945. Andrew M. Hill, The Unitarian Path, Lindsay Press, ISBN 0-85319-046-1, Charles A. Howe, For Faith and Freedom, A Short History of Unitarianism in Europe, Skinner House Books, ISBN 1-55096-359-6, Smith, Matthew F., Unitarians, Christianity, The Complete Guide, London, Continuum, ISBN A0-8264-5937-4A. Bibliography, Buzzard, A. and Hunting, See the Doctrine of the Trinity, Christianity's Self-Inflicted Wound. International Scholars Publications. ISBN 1-57309-309-2, Lloyd, Walter. The Story of Protestant Descent and English Unitarianism. Rowe, Mortimer. The History of Essex Hall. London, Lindsay Press, 1959. Full text reproduced here, 3. Further reading, Chisholm, Hugh, ed. Unitarianism. Encyclopedia Britannica 27. Cambridge University Press pp. 594 €597 Merton, Ephraim. Unitarian Thought. New York, Macmillan Company. OCLCA 1403642. Retrieved April 22, 2011. Hewitt, Austin Philip. An Unfettered Faith, The Religion of a Unitarian. London, Lindsay Press. External links: Unitarian Ministries International, Unitarianism at BBC Religions, American Unitarian Conference, American Unitarian Reform, General Assembly of Unitarian and Free Christian Churches, Biblical Unitarians, the Free Christian Church of Unitarians and Universalists.